We now turn to the next item of business. The next item of business is portfolio questions, and the first portfolio this afternoon is Constitution, External Affairs and Culture and Parliamentary Business. And could I ask those members who are leaving the chamber to now do so quietly? Thank you. And at question number 1, I call Fulton McGregor.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what support it provides to the outdoor arts, circus and spectacle sector.
Cabinet Secretary Angus Robertson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Creative Scotland supports 9 organisations with an outdoor arts, circus and spectacle background through its multi-year funding programme, with funding that will total almost £4 million over the 3-year periods of awards. 6 of those organisations had not received core funding from Creative Scotland previously. This result has been made possible by record levels of funding provided by the Scottish Government for multi-year funding. The Scottish Government support increased the multi-year funding budget by £20 million in 2025-26, and a further £20 million increase is planned in the draft budget for 2026-27, taking the total available to £74 million.
Fulton McGregor.
The Cabinet Secretary for that answer. Earlier this month I sponsored an event here at the Parliament alongside Articulation, marking the publication of Beyond the Stage, Scotland's first ever report on outdoor arts, circus and spectacle. Amongst other things, the report noted that as Creative Scotland does not recognise outdoor arts, circus and spectacle as a distinct arts forums, artists are often forced to apply it under generic categories, resulting in misaligned support and making it difficult to track or understand investment in the sector. Does the Cabinet Secretary agree with me that formal recognition of outdoor arts, circus and spectacle in Scotland would greatly support artists and cultural events, as well as help to deliver the culture strategy and international culture strategy for 24 to 2030?
Cabinet Secretary.
I welcome the contribution that outdoor art, circuses and spectacle bring to Scotland's culture sector and recognise the challenges and opportunities facing their distinct art forms. Our culture strategy celebrates the diversity and excellence of cultures in Scotland, and the Scottish Government will continue to work with Creative Scotland and stakeholders to ensure we can best support our mutual goals for the culture sector. But if Fulton McGregor would like to follow up on this question and answer session on the specifics that he raised in his supplementary, I'd be happy to enter correspondence with him.
Question number 2, Tess White.
To ask the Scottish Government how it ensures value for money when allocating funding within the Constitution, External Affairs and Culture portfolio.
Cabinet Secretary.
The Constitution, External Affairs and Culture portfolio received £415.8 million in the Scottish Government draft budget for 2026-27. This represents a £36.1 million increase in funding compared to this financial year. Funding is allocated based on principles of best value and is allocated to both existing reoccurring projects and also new projects. Decisions on draft budget allocations are made by the Scottish Ministers based on advice provided by policy officials and in discussions with special advisers.
Tess White.
The Government's tax and spending plans show that funding for international and European relations will rise by 29.3%. 2 years ago, it rose by 12%. And during that time, in the North East, Angus has lost its award-winning Gateway to the Glens Museum. Dundee Rep is reeling after the council cut its funding and the Gardyne Theatre recently made its staff redundant. Aberdeen has closed 6 libraries, with more doubtless to come. Why is the Culture Secretary wasting so much money on his jet-set Walter Mitty lifestyle when the core of his job, the one that's expected by the taxpayers, is being eroded after years of SNP cuts?
Cabinet Secretary.
I'm genuinely surprised that Tess White isn't aware that the increase in the External Affairs Advice and Policy budget reflects the inward transfer of budgets from areas out with the portfolio for teams working on population and migration and international climate change. Scotland's international network does a lot of work to promote Scotland's culture internationally. I'm sorry that there are ever-growing numbers of voices amongst her party which seek to reduce that work. Her predecessor on the front bench used to call for the increase of Scotland's international network. It's a sad day that the Conservative Party, which actually set up Scotland's first international office, are now choosing to downgrade them.
Supplementary, Alistair Allen.
It's grimly amusing to hear a Tory using the words value for money, funding and external affairs in the same sentence. Scotland still awaits from the Tories some contrition for the travesty of Brexit. So can the Scottish Government say what funding Scotland has lost out on since Brexit was forced on us?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, Brexit has been an unmitigated economic and social disaster. Its red tape has increased costs to businesses and hit Scotland's trade with our largest international export market, which is the European Union. Recent research estimates that the United Kingdom suffered a 2.5% hit to GDP due to Brexit in 2023, which is forecast to increase to 5.7% by 2035. In Scotland, this equates to a cut in public revenues of around £2.3 billion in 2023 alone. I'll take no lessons from the Tories on external affairs.
Question number 3, Brian Whittle.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what discussions the Cabinet Secretary for Constitution, External Affairs and Culture has had with ministerial colleagues regarding how to ensure that Scotland maximises the cultural legacy benefits of the 2026 Summer of Sport.
Cabinet Secretary.
The Scottish Government is drawing on the successful cultural legacy of the 2014 Commonwealth Games to inform its approach to Glasgow 2026. In 2014, culture was embedded as a core part of the Games, helping to widen participation, to showcase Scotland internationally and to strengthen the cultural sector. For 2026, the Government will seek to ensure that governance and planning are in place from an early stage to maximise long-term public benefit, and I've already had meetings with ministerial colleagues to discuss maximising the impact of and legacy from the Commonwealth Games, and look forward to those continuing over the coming months.
Brian Whittle.
Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer? And I think he agrees with me that sport is culture. And in 2014, the Commonwealth Games showed Scotland in Glasgow in its very best light. But when that caravan packed up and left, contrary to what the Cabinet Secretary seems to think, the 2014 legacy left a lot to be desired. For example, Scotland is the jewel in the crown this time round as a venue. But right next door to that, the hockey centre that was developed for 2014 crumbles and is no longer being used properly. And as hockey around Scotland is now becoming an islands of hockey. So how will we learn from that? How will we make sure that the same mistakes are not made again in 2026 is a success when we come to the culture of legacy?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, firstly, can I acknowledge Brian Whittle's expertise and commitment to sport and culture in this context. I can assure him that a lot of effort was put into making sure the legacy benefits from 2014, but also events like the UCI Cycling World Championships endure into the years ahead. He said that that things have been less than desired in the context of legacy. I genuinely offered to him a wish that he might share with me and colleagues areas where he thinks that the discussions in the months ahead to the Commonwealth Games forthcoming in Glasgow to ensure that we have the best possible games. That is an offer that I offer to all members from all parties, because we want to make sure that we do it right.
And supplementary, Paul McLennan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I welcome the Scottish Government's £40 million investment in a summer of sport, providing thousands of young people with the opportunity to get involved in sports and learn to swim this summer. Can the Cabinet Secretary say any more about the Scottish Government's work to commemorate this year of national events?
Cabinet Secretary.
Sport and physical activity are among the most powerful ways to support physical, mental and social well-being. Our Summer of Sport programme in 2026 will provide opportunities for every child and young person in Scotland to take part in free, accessible sporting activity, and this programme aims to inspire lifelong participation and help Scotland become a healthier, more connected nation.
Thank you. I now turn to question 4, Liam Kerr.
To ask the Scottish Government what its position is on whether the 5 national performing companies are essential infrastructure investment and whether the funding that it provides to them is sufficient.
Cabinet Secretary.
I recognise the important role that the national performing companies play in the cultural infrastructure of Scotland. We'll continue to fund the internationally acclaimed work of our national performing companies in 2026-27, with a view to providing them with additional funding in future financial years as part of the commitment towards an additional £100 million. This funding builds on the uplift of £1 million in funding across our 5 national performing companies in 25-26 and an additional £700,000 of funding in 2024-25. This investment takes their core funding to the highest level since 2011-2012.
Liam Kerr.
Grateful, but independent analysis shows that for every £1 invested by the Scottish Government in the RSNO, it returns more than £4 to the economy and nearly £3 in wellbeing benefits. An additional £3 million would provide almost £14 million of economic impact. Yet with a salary bill of over £5 million, which is greater than the Government provides, the RSNO was forced to make redundancies last year. So does the Cabinet Secretary accept that the proposed cut to the RSNO's budget doesn't make economic sense and risks severe damage to one of Scotland's leading cultural institutions?
Cabinet Secretary.
I don't accept the characterisation from Mr Kerr. I'm a great supporter of the RSNO, and I acknowledge the benefit that the investment and then the return to Scotland's cultural sector and the economy more generally. I think Mr Kerr would be standing on firmer ground when it comes to supporting cultural organisations in Scotland, is that he would actually have voted for the biggest single increase in culture funding since devolution and COVID. But I recall that Mr Kerr voted against that. So he's not really on very strong ground now calling. Well, he can. I invite Mr Kerr then to vote for this year's budget that sees a further increase in culture funding.
Supplementary, Kenneth Gibson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can the Cabinet Secretary advise why, at a time of steady, above-inflation growth in Scotland's culture budget, the 5 national performing companies are still expected to operate on more or less a flat cash settlement similar to that of 15 years ago? And what impact does he believe that has on the staff of these companies who are expected to survive and perform to an excellent standard, often peripatetically on very modest salaries?
Cabinet Secretary.
Before Parliament sets out that there will be further increases to our national performing companies over the spending review period. Last year they shared an uplift of £1 million, which followed an uplift of £700,000 the previous year. That's a 9.4% uplift since 23-24, taking their funding to almost £25 million, shared across the 5 companies. Scottish Opera will receive £8.65 million through this budget, followed by Scottish Ballet on £4.7 million and the National Theatre of Scotland on £4.5 million. For context, the Creative Scotland multi-year funding for 26-27 is £74 million, shared amongst 263 organisations. The largest amount of funding that goes to performing arts companies through this route is the Dundee Rep and Scottish Dance Theatre on £2.86 million, the Royal Lyceum Theatre at £1.7 million and the Citizens Theatre at £1.6 million.
And I call Neil Bibby, who is joining us remotely.
The national performing companies are one of our most important cultural exports, performing in the other UK nations and internationally in some of the world's most renowned concert halls. And these real terms cuts to 4 out of the 5 organisations in this year's budget will limit their ability to do so. Surely it's the Cabinet Secretary's role to help promote Scotland's culture abroad. So is it that he doesn't realise the immense value of these companies to Scotland's international reputation, or is he happy to blame Shona Robinson for jeopardising her status as a major player on the world stage?
Cabinet Secretary.
Firstly, can I say that we are now 70% of the way towards delivering our uplift, our record uplift in post-COVID funding for the arts, opposed and voted against by the Conservatives and abstained on by Neil Bibby. I look forward to delivering on the £100 million increase in Scotland's culture budget, and the national performing companies are at the forefront of my mind. I would have thought that Neil Bibby would understand that the increase in this year's budget is contributing to the delivery of multi-year funding. That is something that this government is proud to deliver. I look forward to continuing to support the national performing companies, and I have very much them in the forefront of my thoughts about the remainder of the uplift for the budget for culture and arts, and I would invite Neil Bibby to vote for it rather than abstain.
And I call Patrick Harvey.
Thank you. It's not just that these companies are being expected to operate on a budget equivalent to where they were 15 years ago. It's also the fact that they're not being given clarity by the Scottish Government. To say that they might expect something in future years is simply too vague. Does the Cabinet Secretary understand that that vagueness is going to force them to make really urgent decisions that will destroy, that will lose Scotland some of its cultural infrastructure? Will he please offer them some concrete clarity about the funding trajectory that they can rely upon in the immediate term?
Cabinet Secretary.
I can give Mr Harvey that assurance, and those conversations have already been had with the national performing companies. We are in the process of delivering the biggest uplift in culture and arts funding out with COVID in the history of devolution. I am trying to do that as quickly as possible, but we are 70% of the way there. The national performing companies understand that my thinking in terms of the last 30% is very much focused on them in the years ahead, and I agree that they would wish to have as much clarity about that as possible, and I want to give them that.
Question number 5, Rachel Hamilton.
Is my microphone on?
It is now. Could you start from the beginning, please?
Presiding Officer, can I just make a point that the microphones at the start of every question have been inconsistently not working?
OK, we will look into that, but if you would like to
attention.
answer your question.
To ask the Scottish Government whether it will propose the scheduling of time for a ministerial statement on the written case for the Scottish Ministers and Lord Advocate in the judicial review of the Scottish Prison Service policy for the management of transgender people in custody, including how many times women's rights are mentioned.
Minister Grimday.
Presiding Officer, it's the Scottish Government's long-held position that it is inappropriate for Scottish ministers to comment or engage on comment in respect of live litigation, and that is the case both within the Chamber and the media. The Scottish Government has an obligation to uphold the independence of the judiciary, and we would not want the Government to ever be seen as interfering in the work of our independent courts. The court is the appropriate forum for such discussions, and that ensures that proper respect is afforded to the judiciary and litigants.
Rachel Hamilton.
Presiding Officer, the public deserve answers. We've already had an answer from the Supreme Court on the definition of biological sex, not this defensive drivel from the SNP yet again. Does the Minister not know that Scottish ministers set the policy for the Scottish Prison Service and they deliver it? Presiding Officer, female prisoners already victims of male violence and abuse are being re-traumatised, silenced and gaslighted by this Government. May I ask the Government if they are stalling on bringing forward a statement because the First Minister doesn't know what a woman is, or because they are still working out the distinction between a mother taking her young son into a changing room to a violent rapist being housed with vulnerable female prisoners?
Minister.
Presiding Officer, I've laid out very clearly what is motivating the position the Government has taken, and explained it. I don't think there is anything further to add to that, and I'm certainly not going to be dragged into an argument as articulated by Rachel Hamilton in those terms. These are serious matters.
And supplementary, Douglas Ross.
The Minister's on another planet. He says he can't discuss this because of an ongoing legal case. The question is about information that SNP put into the public domain because the First Minister wanted the public to be better informed. So given the SNP are going to court to continue to allow them to house dangerous male prisoners in the female prison estate, can the Minister answer this very simple question? Did every single Cabinet Secretary and Government Minister agree with the written arguments presented in court, including the fact that they made absolutely no mention at all to women's safety?
Minister.
Officer, I've already laid out the Scottish Government's position on this, but I'm struck by the Conservatives' position on this, and indeed harking back to yesterday, because I'm old enough, perhaps depressingly old enough, to remember when the Tories presented themselves as the party of law and order. Yet yesterday, I faced calls from those benches to not give due regard to the risk of the Government committing contempt of court. And today, I'm being challenged to disrespect a set of live legal proceedings by facilitating a parliamentary statement on the matter at issue in parallel.
Question number 6, John Mason.
To ask the Scottish Government what information it holds on the diversity and socio-economic background of audiences attending performances by the national performing companies.
Cabinet Secretary.
Scotland's 5 national performing companies are required to develop a broad and diverse audience base as part of their grant conditions. The national performing companies published a joint social impact report in 2023. I'd be happy to send the member a copy of this report. 1 in 10 of all tickets sold to national performing company events were issued to those living in the most deprived areas of Scotland. 43% of the national performing company audiences live outside large urban areas, including rural and highland and island communities.
John Mason.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. I mean, I do accept that all of them go out into communities, but I'm more interested in who is coming to the main events. I did ask that at the Finance Committee, and Scottish Ballet couldn't really answer. Scottish Opera have since sent me figures which are helpful, or at least a map, and it does show that predominantly the audiences are coming from the West End of Glasgow, up into Bearsden, South Side, out into East Renfrewshire. So is the Cabinet Secretary satisfied that we are reaching as wide an audience as we should be?
Cabinet Secretary.
We should always strive to widen that audience, and I'm at one with John Mason. And I know from the conversations that I've had with the national performing companies that they are committed to this as well. I'm interested with the range of information that Mr Mason has, and perhaps that he doesn't have all information. I have given a commitment to share the information that I have. If, as a result of that, he sees areas where we might be able to pursue better understanding, better statistics, to pursue the shared objective that we have in this, I would be happy to take the matter forward with him.
Question number 7, Gordon MacDonald.
To ask the Scottish Government what recent engagement it has had with the Arctic Circle Assembly.
Cabinet Secretary.
The Scottish Government was represented by officials from the Nordic International Office at the Arctic Circle Assembly in October 2025, who engaged with international stakeholders on a number of issues, including climate change, science and innovation, and rural economic development. This has enabled the Scottish Government to strengthen existing collaborations and gain valuable new insights into a region with a rapidly changing geopolitical environment. The Scottish Government has had ministerial or official representation at every Arctic Circle Assembly since 2016.
Gordon MacDonald.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. Given that Scotland is the world's most northerly non-Arctic nation, what steps is the Scottish Government taking to place Scotland as a link between the Arctic region and the wider world, particularly as a European gateway to the Arctic?
Cabinet Secretary.
Scotland's Arctic Connections policy framework, launched in 2019, strengthens our cooperation with Arctic and sub-Arctic nations by promoting knowledge exchange on shared challenges such as climate change, community resilience and sustainable economic development. The framework highlights areas where Scottish expertise aligns with Arctic priorities and is currently under evaluation, with the recommendations due in February. To enhance Scotland's role as a European gateway to the Arctic, the Scottish Government works closely with Arctic, Nordic and Baltic partners and ensures Scottish participation in key Arctic conferences. We also seek to attract Arctic events to Scotland to broaden civic engagement, and this work is supported by the Scottish Arctic Network of Researchers and by the Scottish Government Office in Copenhagen, Ottawa and Washington DC, which helps maintain and deepens Scotland's Arctic relationships.
And question number 8, Richard Leonard.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government when it last met the United States Consul General in Edinburgh to discuss Scotland's international strategy.
Cabinet Secretary.
Scottish Government ministers and officials have regular meetings with the US Consul General and US Consulate staff as part of our ongoing bilateral engagement with the United States. I most recently spoke with Catherine Porter at a parliamentary event to mark the US semi-quincentennial, and we've not had any specific meetings to discuss the Scottish Government's international strategy, which was published in January 2024. However, ministerial and senior official level engagements with United States partners often includes discussions on Scotland's approach to international issues.
Richard Leonard.
Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that reply? The siege of Venezuela, the seizure of its president and the recolonisation of its oil fields, the continuing siege of Cuba and the threat to its sovereignty, the threat to Greenland and the robbery of its mineral wealth, isn't this naked aggression? Isn't this raw imperialism? Aren't these illegal actions of Donald Trump ones which all democratic governments should unequivocally and unconditionally condemn?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, Mr Leonard knows the First Minister has put the position of the Scottish Government on a number of these questions on the record. I would add to the list that it's important at the present time to also appreciate the sanctions regime, which is supported by the international community against Vladimir Putin's Russia, who are using trade in oil to fuel their conflict against Ukraine. And we support the UK government's position and the international position in supporting Ukraine and in support of sanctions. In terms of some of the other questions that Mr Leonard has raised, I think he's aware that the First Minister is giving a statement later today, and I would wish to encourage him to be present in the Chamber to hear what the First Minister has to say.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. That concludes portfolio questions on Constitution, External Affairs and Culture and Parliamentary Business. Of the 8 members who were seeking a supplementary, apologies to the 2 I was unable to call, but obviously I needed to protect the rest of the afternoon's business. There will be a short pause before we move on to the next item of business. Thank you.
Okay, the next item of business is portfolio questions on justice and home affairs. Just a reminder, due to the amount of business we've got to get through this afternoon and this evening, I would appreciate brevity in questions and responses. I call question number 1, Willie Coffey.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government how its draft budget 2026-27 will support community justice services.
Cabinet Secretary Angela Constance.
Presiding Officer, the draft budget for 26-27 includes £10 million increase for community justice services, taking total funding to a record £169 million and building on the £25 million of additional investment made over the past 2 years. This uplift reflects the Scottish Government's commitment to strengthening community justice, reinforcing frontline capacity and ensuring services across Scotland are well supported. And the increased resources will help expand effective alternatives to custody, including diversion and community sentences, which can help reduce reoffending. And the sustained investment highlights the central role of community justice in rehabilitation, prevention and the delivery of justice in Scotland.
Willie Coffey.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer and pleased to note the additional funding going in to support this. Could the Cabinet Secretary outline how the investment is reducing reoffending, particularly in my constituency of Kilmarnock and Irvine Valley?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, community payback orders are a robust community sentence which make people pay back to the community while taking a tailored approach to target the needs of individuals and address the underlying causes of their offending behaviour. And the latest statistics show another increase in the use of CPOs with a successful completion rate of 71%. And the evidence demonstrates that community services are more effective in reducing reoffending than in comparison to short-term prison sentences. And I would hope that would be a matter of reassurance to Mr Coffey and his constituents.
Will brief supplementaries. First, Liam Kerr.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Whilst the increase to the community justice budget is welcome, the reoffending rate remains stubbornly high at 27%. What assessment can the Cabinet Secretary point to which examines where the shortfalls in historic funding were most missed, and when are these increased sums projected to show an improvement in the reoffending rate?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I'm very pleased that Mr Kerr recognises the increased investment. This is the third year in a row that under my tenure there has been increased investment that totals £35 million. I am pleased to say that the bulk of the £169 million, £148 million will be invested in justice social work, and there is a plethora of information that speaks to the importance of justice social work in supervising these orders, which does lead to their success.
Katie Clark.
Only 2% of the total allocated for justice and home affairs is assigned to community justice, but out of this, only 10% has been allocated to third sector organisations delivering frontline services. Local authorities, of course, provide a significant proportion of community justice, but their budgets have been cut by about 50% in real terms since 2010. So they say they aren't able to provide the range of services needed. Does the Cabinet Secretary believe that this level of funding can deliver the shift to community justice across Scotland needed to reduce reoffending and tackle the root causes of crime?
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The member makes a good point about the importance of sustained funding in community justice, and that is what I've been focused on and have delivered. She may be interested to know that in terms of justice social work, in 2016-17 it was £95 million invested, and that, as I've said, has increased to £148 million, and that is an increase of above 55%.
Question 2, Finlay Carson.
Assessment is made of access to justice services in rural areas.
Minister Siobhan Brown.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. The Scottish Government is committed to ensuring access to justice in rural areas. Scottish Legal Aid Board has recently undertaken a comprehensive analysis to collect evidence of the degree of civil legal aid activity at a geographical level to find out where the gaps are. In saying that, we recognise that there are some challenges in relation to certain locations, and through our ongoing reform programme, we are considering targeted interventions, including grant funding and capacity building initiatives to strengthen access to legal aid where it's needed most. Regulation of Legal Services Scotland Act will also remove restrictions preventing charities, law centres and citizens' advice bodies from directly employing solicitors to provide certain legal services.
Finlay Carson.
I thank the Minister for her response. Even before COVID, Rape Crisis Scotland warned survivors in Wigtonshire were waiting more than 2 years for justice. In Stranraer, things are only getting worse, with just one sheriff and no local jury trials. Victims and witnesses are having to travel 75 miles to Dumfries, often alone, just to give evidence. Latest figures from the Scottish Courts and Tribunal Service confirms the average wait for a sheriff's summary evidence-led trial is now increasing further. Will the Minister, as a matter of urgency, examine whether reinstating jury trials in the town could help survivors in rural areas like my own constituency and speed up matters and prevent this intolerable wait for justice?
Minister.
Thank you. And I'd just say that decision really would be for the Scottish Courts and Tribunals to make that decision. I do know that funding is provided through the Scottish Legal Aid Board to 16 projects in areas including Dumfries and Galloway to provide assistance and representation.
Supplementary, Jamie Hepburn.
The Minister set out how improvements can be made to accessing the legal aid system in rural Scotland through the uplift in funding to the Justice portfolio as proposed in the Scottish Government's budget.
Minister.
Thank you. The Scottish Government is committed to improving the legal aid system across Scotland. The draft budget maintained substantial increases in legal aid over recent years, and I'm pleased to advise the Chamber that today regulations have been laid that will, if approved, provide a fee for a 13% fee increase for legal aid solicitors' fees and fixed payments. To further secure the future sustainability of the legal aid system, the Independent Fee Review Mechanism Group that I am committed to has been established. It has met, and I will update Parliament once the independent chair has been appointed. And the Scottish Budget has also made the provision to double the number of places for the Legal Aid Traineeship Fund from 20 to 40 to improve the sustainability and capacity of legal profession.
Okay, question 3, Rona Mackay.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on the current occupancy levels and total operational capacity across the Women's Community Custody Unit estate.
Secretary.
Officer, as of 22nd January, 335 women are in custody, which represents 89% of the total capacity of the SPS Women's Estate. The Bella Community Custody Unit is accommodating 13 women at 81% of its design capacity, and Lilius Community Custody Unit is accommodating 16 women at 67%. The women living in the community custody units have undergone robust risk and needs assessments and have been approved by a multidisciplinary team as part of the process to ensure their compatibility to such a unique living environment. The CCUs, the first of their kind in the UK, drew on international best practice to deliver evidence-based and trauma-informed interventions for all women who live there.
Rona Mackay.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. Does the Cabinet Secretary agree that for the majority of women, traditional incarceration is not the answer, and that these units spearhead a vital, holistic approach to reintegration while mitigating the damaging and generational effects that prison can have on families and children?
Cabinet Secretary.
Officer, I agree that the success of the community custody units represents a bold and progressive change to supporting in women to better prepare women for their return to the community, and the success forms part of a holistic approach to caring for women and builds on the positive foundations laid by the bespoke Women's National Facility, HMP and YOI Stirling. Both are underpinned by the SPS strategy for women in custody, which promotes and recognises the damaging impact of imprisonment of women on their families and their children.
Question 4, Annabel Ewing.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government when the Cabinet Secretary for Justice and Home Affairs last met with For Women Scotland to discuss the protection of women's sex-based rights.
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, the Cabinet Secretary for Social Justice has responsibility for equality and rights. Ms Somerville and the Minister for Equalities met For Women Scotland on the 22nd of May 2025, following the UK Supreme Court judgment, which the Scottish Government has accepted. Officials have also met with For Women Scotland to discuss the impact of the judgment. I have not met with For Women Scotland, and as they are engaged in live litigation with the Scottish Government, a meeting at this time would not be appropriate.
Annabel Ewing.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for her answer and, of course, would commend listening to all sides of a debate, as this would, of course, be the mark, I would have thought, of an open and transparent government. Presiding Officer, I asked the Cabinet Secretary on the 25th of June 2025 when the UK Supreme Court ruling would be reflected in the protection of women in the prison estate. Some 7 months later, that has still not happened, notwithstanding that the April 2025 ruling was and remains of immediate legal effect. Given these further delays to the protection of women in the prison estate and the recent manoeuvrings to kick the can down the road in the case of Ash Regan's bill on the criminalisation of the purchase of sex, it grieves me to ask Cabinet Secretary, but why are these women's rights now so far down the pecking order of this government?
Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And if I can thank Ms Ewan for her question. I consider Ms Ewan a colleague and indeed a friend, and I hope that she knows that both personally and professionally that I always take great care to listen to different views with respect and carry that forward in my working life and in my professional life. As the member will be aware, just this morning, that the regulations to put biological sex into the hate crime framework was laid this morning. I, of course, will dispute vigorously the fact that the suggestion that women's rights have fallen down the agenda for this government. I do accept that there is no monopoly over concern for the safety of women. I carry as part of my duties the safety and security of all prisoners, and also including prison staff, and I've had to make a number of decisions to uphold the safety and well-being of prisoners and staff. In terms of other matters,
briefly, Cabinet Secretary.
I appreciate, Presiding Officer, that I can't go into detail of the live litigation matters, but as the First Minister said, the fact that we have not changed prison guidance, people can take from that we have concluded that it does not need to be changed in light of the Supreme Court judgment. The Government has to comply with all our legal requirements, but this is now a matter for the courts to opine on, and as always we follow the rule of law.
Thank you. I am going to need briefer response. I'm going to get supplementary. Douglas Ross.
With these answers this afternoon, I can see why the SNP don't want to be questioned on this issue. But a female prisoner, in testimony, said that she had concerns about being housed with a biological male in the female prison estate. When that was raised, the government shared it with the police without consulting the individual or the court. It's been described as an attempt to silence and intimidate. And Aidan O'Neill, representing For Women Scotland, said the SNP's actions amounted to an attempt to discipline and punish a woman for speaking out on gender issues. Cabinet Secretary, he's right, isn't he?
Cabinet Secretary, brief.
Presiding Officer, I always think it's a matter of great regret when one member has spoke of the need of a balanced and a fair debate, and yet we hear another member whose views he is entitled to and I respect, of course, picks one side of an argument. And it is, of course... Well, Presiding Officer...
Resume your seat, Cabinet Secretary. I've allowed supplementaries on this. Mr Kerr, in particular, could you refrain from shouting from a sedentary position? Cabinet Secretary, and briefly.
Presiding Officer, it is important that the courts are enabled to proceed with their deliberations on this matter. This Government respects the opinions of every court decision, and as always we seek to comply with all of our legal challenges.
Thank you. Question 5, Emma Roddick. I call Emma Roddick, question 5. We do not have a connection. I will investigate that and advise members as appropriate. And I call question 6, Edward Mountain.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what additional resources are being provided to Police Scotland in relation to asylum seekers being housed at Cameron Barracks in Inverness.
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, Police Scotland is engaged in a multi-agency planning group led by the Home Office. Any additional resources required for the proposed use of Cameron Barracks are for the Home Office to determine, working with Police Scotland and other public service partners to identify what further support may be needed. Despite repeated Scottish Government requests, there remains a total lack of information from the Home Office. We have yet to be given any timeline for adopting the site and understand the Home Office has still to confirm a final decision on whether Cameron Barracks will be used.
Edward May.
And I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. My problem is that the Home Office are not only not talking to the Cabinet Secretary, they're not talking to Police Scotland. When I recently went out with Police Scotland on a Friday evening in Inverness, I saw how firsthand how pushed the police were. There were 3 mobile patrols of officers, that's 6 officers, to cover a huge area with a population of 82,000 people. Does the Cabinet Secretary really believe that the Police Scotland have sufficient resources, considering the fact that in Crowborough the extra time and cost is taxing not only the local police forces but the whole of England?
Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I appreciate the member's frustration with the lack of communication from the Home Office. I know each and every police officer in this country works hard, and that's why, as a government in our draft budget, that we will invest over £1.7 billion in policing. It is, of course, a matter of regret that if other burdens are put on them from elsewhere, from other governments, that is not met, and it is also a matter of regret that Police Scotland are having to deal with other decisions made by the UK Government, including their failure to pay for the visits of the American VIPs, which means we've been shortchanged of over £22 million.
I'll take a brief supplementary with a reminder that this is in relation to Cameron Barracks in Inverness. Bill Kidd.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I've just been covered there, actually, by the Cabinet Secretary's response. So that's it.
Thank you. I'm going to call question 7, Ruth Maguire.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government for what reason the prison estate is segregated by sex.
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, the Scottish prison services are required to comply with relevant legislation and work towards international standards and norms to uphold the rights of all individuals while they are in custody. The prison rules, which are based on international standards, provide for the separation generally of men and women and are applied in such a way as to better support their individual needs whilst in custody.
Ruth Maguire.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. The legal submission published by the Scottish Government states, and I quote, "There is no general requirement in law that sexes be segregated. Do the Scottish Government still support single-sex spaces? And if so, what assessment of the risk have the Scottish Government made that the legal arguments that they're advancing in court could ultimately result in a breakdown of these established conventions to provide female-only spaces for reasons of safety and dignity, and a requirement for a fundamental reassessment of the Equality Act?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, prison rules in relation to establishments are part of the Prisons and Young Offenders Institution Scotland rule, and that is rooted in the 1989 Prisons Act. Where the member's question touches upon is Rule 126, which relates to the separation of male and female prisoners. And the interpretation and operation of Rule 126 is, of course, is a matter that, in relation to the placement of trans prisoners, is one of the key issues that is being debated and disputed as a result of the live litigation, which I can't comment on further. However, the reason that the Scottish Government published its note of arguments and answers is that we recognise and appreciate the general public interest in this issue, and in particular the circumstances of this case, and in the interest of open justice. And it's there to enable people who have an interest to follow the case. But the case must be decided in the court. That is the appropriate place for these debates.
Thank you. I'm going to get a couple of supplementaries. They will need to be brief, but the responses will need to be briefer. Shannon Dowie first.
Thank you. Presiding Officer, I recently received a letter from Angela Constance, the Justice Secretary, in which she said two things. The first, that the Scottish Government accepts the Supreme Court ruling. The second, that guidance for prisons, and I quote, does not need to be changed. So to clarify, the Scottish Government accepts the Supreme Court ruling on sex, but it also thinks it perfectly fine for male prisoners to be housed alongside vulnerable women. How can the Scottish Government justify holding this ludicrous position?
Secretary.
Presiding Officer, to be brief, as the member is a member of the Criminal Justice Committee, she will be well aware that the policy where evidence was provided to the Criminal Justice Committee at its heart is all about the assessment of risk and needs of transgender prisoners, and actually all prisoners, because there are particular requirements for SPS and therefore ministers to ensure the safety and well-being of all prisoners.
And briefly, Polly McNeill.
A study at Glasgow University showed that a third of women serving a sentence roughly have had head injuries, and the vast majority have been subjected to domestic violence. So I wonder if the Cabinet Secretary could outline why the Scottish Government are subjecting vulnerable women to what is a very public court case, throwing off in the arguments, essentially saying why they will not continue to support the segregation of the estate, the prison estate, by sex any longer by this challenge.
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, while I would acknowledge and respect the research quoted by Ms McNeill, I think her characterisation of the Scottish Government's position is not one that I would adhere to.
Question 8, Evelyn Tweed.
Presiding Officer, to ask the Scottish Government how its draft budget 2026-27 supports the prevention of gender-based violence.
Minister.
Thank you. We remain steadfast in our commitment to preventing and eradicating violence against women and girls, and have allocated over £30 million through the Scottish budget to this vital work in 2026 to 2027. This funding will enable the Delivering Equally Safe and Victim-Centred Approach funds and Scotland's Domestic Abuse and Forced Marriages Helpline to continue to support vital work to prevent violence and support survivors of gender-based violence. We will also allocate £2 million from our Ending Homelessness Together Fund for the National Fund to Leave, which supports women and children to leave an abusive relationship and remain safe.
Evelyn Tweed.
I thank the Minister for that answer. Rural gender-based violence services face different challenges. How does the draft budget support services working in rural areas?
Minister.
Our Equally Safe strategy recognises that women in rural and island communities and the specialist organisation that support them can face particular challenges, and that abuse can be even more hidden than in the urban areas. We fund vital specialist support services across every local authority in Scotland, including and importantly in our rural and our island communities through our Delivering Equally Safe Fund. From the £21.6 million that we've allocated for 26-27, over £5.4 million of that is going to projects that support women and girls in our most rural and island communities.
Thank you. That concludes portfolio questions on Justice and Home Affairs. There will be a brief pause before we move to the next item of business to allow front benches to change.